Welcome to Claris Talk AI. This is Matt Navarre. This is a special episode. I was a guest on the FileMaker DevCast with the Portage Bay staff, and this is that recording. So enjoy, and we'll be back with the normal episode with Cris very soon.
So it's time for the DevCast. Welcome, everyone. I'm Dan Smiley, your host and citizen developer, and we're super excited today to have Matt Navarre coming to us from the island of Crete in the lovely Mediterranean. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening is what it is, right? Good evening. How are
morning to all
you?
you. I'm excellent. How many time zones are you guys all in today?
Um, I'm in Pacific, so I'm +8.
Yeah.
Pacific,
I
Pacific
think
for me.
yeah, same for me. I
Yeah,
think maybe
Seattle.
I'm the
Joe.
only one in the Midwest. I'm in Omaha,
Yeah.
Got
Nebraska.
it.
So
Yeah. I'm in -3 Eastern European time. So what do you guys want to nerd out about today?
So today the topic is JSON. What can we do with JSON? What is cool about JSON? Why do we care about JSON? We've got a bunch of JSON running in some of my projects. Don't we, Jacob? Aren't we parsing Jacob in the AIS app?
Yeah, we're parsing JSON in
Yeah.
in your app. Yeah.
Yeah. So all of these guys work on my apps. What I do is I build them and then I break them and then I pay them to fix them. That's how that works. And
Perfect.
they're all quite tolerant of me at this point.
Every FileMaker developer owes their living to people like you.
Yes, exactly right.
who who use FileMaker and then start a business, and then the business gets really successful, and then they become more interested in running the business than developing the FileMaker, so they bring in experts to do the FileMaker stuff. That's time and time again how FileMaker has grown.
So Matt, tell us a little about yourself. How did you come to be a FileMaker developer and what kind of projects are you currently engaged in?
Well, I'm one of the guys that goes back to version 1. So I've actually been a database developer since 1983. I know, I look good for my age. Since before FileMaker even came out, which, by the way, was April 1st, 1985.
Okay.
Trivia. So yeah, I started back then. Of course, FileMaker wasn't, it was just a kind of a toy. Well, all the products were nothing compared to what they are now. And then kind of stuck with it. So it's been kind of the consistent thing throughout my whole career. I was a developer, like a consultant for a long time. I worked as an in-house developer, and released a product for Catholic church music on CD back in the 90s, I guess. Then I started Pre-One Software, and we developed a vertical for newspapers and magazine advertising, and then sold that. And then I started AppWorks, and as a consulting company, we got up to about 10 employees, and I sold that and moved to Greece. And now I'm starting Navarre Training, which is just me. And I'm in the really good position of being able to do kind of whatever I want to do with FileMaker, and that's teach. I actually teach classes on JSON because I love it. JSON is like as closest thing as I have to a religion. I feel passionately about it. I think, the people like me who go back a long time with FileMaker, that doesn't matter. What matters is the thing you've done most recently. And so I'm having so much fun keeping up on stuff. Dan, like you and I were talking a minute ago, chat and open in ChatGPT every day, right?
Every day.
Using it, learning. I use it for so many things unrelated to FileMaker, and also tons of learning in FileMaker. Yeah, I have several different custom GPTs that I use for different tasks. The kind that you can upload a document and give it instructions and whatnot.
Yeah, no, I love it. I've used it for FileMaker, script writing. What I found really fascinating was in some of the databases I've inherited where I wasn't the original developer, and I'm looking at these scripts going, what in the heck did he
Yeah.
do here? And I just dropped the whole thing into ChatGPT and said, explain this to me. And it will sit there and almost write a paragraph per line of script. This is intended to do this. It's referencing this. It's like, wow, that is so cool.
Yep. Debugging, explaining, understanding. Yeah, it's perfect.
I wanted to do a function or a script to do great circle calculations, and
Oh,
I
yeah.
had it wrote the script for the Haversine formula, and with a couple of tweaks, it worked just great. So
So that's beyond citizen developer territory.
okay, well,
I did one of those too to calculate the distance as the crow flies between 2 points. Yeah, but even
yeah.
bigger, greater circle. That's you're talking about like air. The reason that airplanes fly over the North Pole because it's actually shorter than going over the Atlantic. That kind of stuff.
We use it in oil spill response. The Coast Guard uh, regulations calculate the amount of time it'll take for a piece of equipment to travel from one point to the other using a great circle calculation and then applying a speed of 35 miles an hour. So they don't care about turn by turn. They say this is
Hmm.
close enough. And so as we're calculating out the regulatory requirements of how long it'll take to get certain amounts of equipment from one place to the other, we use the Great Circle. But we wrote a script that did that,
Yeah.
and then Zandon wrote the script that did the using Craft Kitchen. Wrote the script that did the turn by turn, and we parsed JSON out of that. So that was super exciting.
Does
Uh,
it do it? Is it by flying you're trying to calculate, or is
No,
it
it's
the
it's
equipment actually driving?
driving. It's driving,
Oh
but
yeah.
the regulation came out in 1990
Mhm.
before there were turn-by-turn directions, and the regulation still exists so that this uh, calculation, they just assume that if you do ask the crow flies and then say that you're limited to 35 miles an hour travel
Mhm.
speed, that's good enough for our.
Unless there's a mountain range in between point
Yeah,
A
yeah,
and point B.
yeah,
But yeah, or an
exactly.
ocean.
So.
All right, cool.
So we're going to talk about JSON. Let me introduce the team to you. We'll run around everybody who's listened knows these folks, but we'll start with Zandon. Good morning, Zandon. How are you? And how are we going to talk about JSON with you today?
Morning, guys. Well, I use JSON all the freaking time because I love it. And so I probably have a couple of fill-ins for how to work with large data sets in JSON. So,
Hmm.
yeah.
And Jacob, good morning.
Morning. I'm out here in California enjoying it. JSON wise, I probably have a cool little tool that you may have seen in VS Code that lets you convert JSON to set JSON pretty easily. So if you haven't seen it before, it's pretty neat.
That'd be awesome. Look forward to that. And Joe, how are you? Where are you coming to us from?
Hey, I'm good. Omaha, Nebraska. As always, we're starting to hit the beginning of fall. We're starting to get a lot of carotenoids up in the leaves. It's nice and orange and yellows.
Hmm.
And in about 2 weeks, we'll start some nice oranges and reds. This is my favorite time of the year.
Yeah, I'm out here in Yakima. We moved out here 6 months ago, and in spite of getting the tree colors starting to change, it was still 89 degrees yesterday.
Wow.
Wow.
So we're still warm. 55 in the morning though. Russell, how are you
Wow.
doing?
I'm doing good. Yeah, I was actually speaking of the 89s. I was just in Texas last week for a wedding in San Antonio, and it was like the mid to high 90s almost the whole time. Crazy muggy. But I'm back in Shoreline, Washington, just a little outside of Seattle. So back to the nice cool weather, a little bit of rain, getting the fall colors as well. Um, but yeah, with JSON, like Xanon said, it's kind of a very highly ingrained in our tool set for many different things like, parameter passing and communications between different processes and things like better forms that me and Jacob quite use a little bit here and there for some
Hmm.
clients. That's pretty much completely packaged in JSON when you build your web pages. So it's quite a useful tool for everyone here. So yeah, happy
I
to
think any
discuss.
communication with any internet technology is all
Yeah.
JSON. Claris Connect, of course, but also just all
Mhm.
the everything out in the internet for API integration once JSON formatted data.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It's
One,
old too. It came out a long time ago, like a couple
Yeah.
years after XML, which was like 1932 or something. Not that old, but like
Wow.
80s, 90s. A lot longer than you think.
I
Wow.
like Mike's quote, but he isn't on the call today. But
Oh
Mike's
yeah.
quote about it's the Rosetta Stone between environments,
Hmm.
which was a pretty good summation, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Be a good title for this podcast.
Isn't
The
didn't they
Rosetta
use
Stone.
JSON when they were breaking the Enigma code? I think they did.
Not quite that old. It would have been
Well,
helpful
we'll
though.
start.
Yeah.
Let's start with our guest instructor, Matt. What is JSON? We all talked about how much we love it and how critical it is, but what is it and why do we care?
JavaScript object notation. You can take that right in and out because it doesn't really matter for anything, but that's the name. It's basically a text format. It's a structured format of text. So basically all the punctuation is allows you to have nested information. So it's not just flat. You can actually have a JSON text object that represents a FileMaker database with related fields. All the information about the company, all the employees who work there, all the other information about them, all the invoices, et cetera. It can be in one text thing. And it can, and it's native to FileMaker. So the flexibility and the simplicity and the readability of it make it just a super useful tool.
So how old is it then? You said it was reaching back, and it's not
go to
JavaScript, right? I mean, it's got
ChatGPT.
JavaScript in the title, but it's not JavaScript.
No, well, it's not. It's kind of related to that because it goes back so long. Yeah, 1990s official standard RFC. Yeah, Douglas Crockford invented it in the early 2000s. Yeah. Anyway, so it's been around 20-ish years, give or take. But it wasn't really the rage back then, right? It was a little bit more obscure. It seems like it's really come into, well, it's certainly come into FileMaker users' lives a lot in the last 5 years or so. Have any of you guys been using it more than 5 years?
Yeah, I think definitely. I mean, it seemed like everybody else was using it, and FileMaker didn't have any way unless you were
Yeah.
using custom functions. So,
Yep.
it's it was just everything was breaking out tool sets to be able to interact with JSON from different IDEs if you were writing other programs and software. It's such a basic and yet useful tool, or not tool, but useful data storage for being able to tell quickly what something is and reference it without having to get all complicated.
Yep. Like XML is, for example.
Yeah, but XML, yeah, exactly. Like XML being the difficulty with XML and its complicated sort of, even though it's simple, right? It's got that complicated sort of tagging process, and it's hard to sort of look at and visualize. Whereas JSON is just, it's just like you read paragraphs with indentations, super easy.
What would you say the fundamental differences are between XML and JSON? Because I don't know if I could explain them except for ease of use.
Yeah, ease of use.
Yeah, readability. Yeah.
Are there
Yeah,
any features XML has that
Yeah.
JSON doesn't?
I don't know of any. I think it's like if you hit all the tagging in XML, it'd be very similar, but I'm not for positive because I haven't worked with XML for a while, other than just, when I have to, when I'm forced to.
Yeah, XML has a nice advantage that you can format for data types, and so your output can be, Word files or Excel files or other types of data formatting embedded into the XML. So as long as you can transfer, convert it out, you've got a lot of options as far as how you want to present that data, but it's overly complicated.
Yeah. I
Yeah, I was
did a
gonna say
quick little thing on
teachability.
ChatGPT. It talks about like namespaces and mixed content attributes and XSLT transformation. So there definitely are some features that it has that JSON doesn't have, but
Yeah.
anyway.
All the more ways to get lost. XSLTs are they're useful, and then at the same time they add a layer of complexity that makes them difficult to access too. So
I think JSON's just easier to teach in general in comparison to XML. For
yeah,
newer developers, I
night
mean,
and day.
we pick it up much faster.
And since it became native to FileMaker in I think 18, um, the features that FileMaker has, JSON get element, JSON set element, two absolute key ones, are so easy to use, and so powerful that you basically, if you're a FileMaker developer at this point, you cannot afford not to get really good at using JSON. It's no longer really an option, even for just regular FileMaker use, in my opinion. I have opinions. I even have I started a new podcast series or a new video series called the FileMaker Opinion page. You can find it on navar.training or I'll make a couple of plugs here, not too many.
Absolutely. No, plug away.
One of the other things, where I am in the industry, how long I've been in, I get to sort of start sharing opinions now and not really care if people, but also I really want to have the disagreement. I want to have that conversation. But yeah, I certainly have a strong opinion about that. It's something that you cannot avoid if you are watching this, listening, and you don't have much knowledge. Go out and find a way. Find someone to help you with it. Take one of my free classes. Find a way.
Your classes are free?
Well, I offer free classes that are 45 minutes. On a bunch of different topics. And then a week or two later on the same topic, I do a 2-hour integrated class that's not free, where we dive in and actually have people share their screen and we actually integrate what we talked about. So if you haven't used JSON, you could come to the paid class and then actually learn how to use it in your system, give you a bunch of sample code, look at it in your scripts. So, and in that class, I don't even share my screen. It's just all interactive people with students. Super fun. That's how I love to teach.
Because I just bought the O'Reilly book on it and started reading it, and that's as far as I've gotten, because then I was overtaken by events. But after watching Zandon integrate the Google Maps API with turn-by-turn directions, I got to get this. I got to figure this out because it was super cool.
Yeah.
So that's the best way. You think the best way to learn it, for somebody to learn it, is to, find an online video? I mean, I'll tell you, most of my FileMaker core learning came from watching Cris courses on lynda.com.
Yep.
I watched them all over and over and over again. And now I turn to ChatGPT for my coding assistance.
Yep.
And
as do I, and as does Cris. The other plug is he and I have a podcast called Claris Talk AI. This hopefully we'll be releasing this recording in the stream of that podcast as well. Cross post. So using ChatGPT is an excellent way to learn it. So ChatGPT is okay at FileMaker, but there's not as rich information out on the internet about it. There's a ton about JSON. There's a ton about execute SQL. There's a ton about JavaScript. So all these other things, it's just almost perfect at. And since one of them is JSON, it's a really, really good way to learn.
Anybody have a use case, a project where they found that JSON was the default, the de facto?
All of them.
All of them. And even then, as I talked about working with large data sets, once you start using some in browser, using the web viewer, JavaScript items to display it, then it's so much faster in working with extremely large data sets for lists, for showing the information, for graphing, a whole 9 yards, and even using other JavaScript functions, which, are going to rely on native, on JSON. They, it's so much faster. So you're no longer having to traverse through records in FileMaker. You just have to have some way to cache them, I think, is the
right. What do you define as a very large data set?
Well, everybody wants to toss in, thousands and thousands of map waypoints, right, or places into their maps, and have the pins show up all over the map. And so you quickly, if you have to go through and cycle through that, just a few hundred records, thousands of records takes a little bit longer. But once you start hitting millions of characters, the process of loading per record, it just isn't feasible. And so, but JSON can handle it super fast, and it just sends it over as one chunk of of data. So there's some really efficient ways to work with it once you have it in JSON. The difficult part there is managing how to insert and update the JSON because you are going to be storing information in it as a cache versus where FileMaker, you're accessing the data live from each record. Or
so, like in
And
Google
you
Maps,
start
if
getting
do
cost, right? Cost. There's a lot of cost involved. Every one of those insert from URL calls there's a cost from Google for that, and you can quite quickly hit that whatever it is $200 a month free cap, and then it starts to get kind of pricey. So and that's what's going on with the World Track Web call right now. That's 5,782 records, and as you send 5,782 insert from URL requests, one, it takes a lot of time, but every one of those is a separate API call.
Yeah, where you can just make one and get the whole thing.
Well, can we make that sounds like we're not doing it right, Zandon.
Well, see, the way that Google Maps would do if you just go to the website is it dynamically loads it as you see it in the window, right? So if you're looking at a window of Yakima, you see the 47 pins that are in that area. If you zoom out, then you'd see more. But then if you zoom into another area and you go down to Portland or Eugene or whatever, then you would see those pins. And actually, you could do this with FileMaker because one of the things I love most about JSON, the JSON set element command specifically, is that you can append existing JSON. So if you have a bunch of stuff already in there, you can use JSON set element to just add stuff or change stuff. And nothing else in FileMaker kind of works that way. And so that's definitely one thing I love about it. Also, there's a JSON delete element command that you can delete like some chunk of it, or those are the super powerful things. I know you guys love those too.
Oh, definitely. Those are key to being able to update a large cache. And to clarify, excuse me, what Dan's talking about is you're talking about the boat references, right? And their location, which have to be updated. So we don't really have, or is it the boat stuff? I forget exactly, but you're having to make calls to get the actual, like, this isn't something where we can cache the information at all. It's like it has to be requested each time. So that there's a little bit of a constraint there. If you could cache it, then it's a completely different function, right? If you can.
So there's two different apps there. So the one that Jacob worked on, which is the automatic identification system, where we're pulling data from a live stream of NEMA sentences and then converting those to JSON so that we can pull the data that's coming in off the stream into FileMaker. So that's one thing, and it already has the longitude and latitudes and all that kind of stuff in it. But the one we've got 270 separate locations around the United States where oil spill response equipment is stored. And that equipment might have to be dispatched to any number of locations, oil terminals. So we have the data from where the equipment's coming from, but it could virtually go anywhere. And so that would be difficult to cache.
Yeah, got to do a query. But then you guys would use better forms, right? The other things you would well know is, because it's also JSON native, is it's extremely efficient at getting at being sent a bunch of JSON with a simple request. So having a script in FileMaker that has the logic to make as few requests as possible to get that data. I don't know, maybe just using your example, it would say, oh, okay, well, I'm only getting something from this location, so only look at the inventory in that location. It's only going to these 5 locations, so only take a look at the subset of records that are going from that to those 5 locations, and then do a single API call request to that set. And then package that up and display it however you're going to do that, yeah? Is that how you're doing it?
Yeah, you could filter down the JSON, definitely. I mean, if you're using better forms, I mean, as long as you had a filter by location, I mean, there's even functions that we have. They're not functions that exist natively to FileMaker, but I think Geist has one that's JSON filter. and you can filter out by specific, properties or keys.
Yeah. So I think there's kind of some couple levels, right? There's like high school level JSON, and then there's, postgraduate JSON. Like if you have millions of records, I did a podcast episode a while ago with a guy in England who has a furniture database, and he can have an entire kitchen of every single nut and bolt and screw and cabinet and everything, a gigantic 3D representation of tens of thousands of things in JSON that's then displayed in 3D where you can grab it and rotate it. All the data comes from FileMaker. So that's the higher end stuff. And I think when you get to, you guys can correct me, you get really, really large record sets, like a million objects in a JSON. It's not going to perform well in FileMaker using the native commands. You're going to have to use some other tools. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And that's where I was going to go with the large data sets, right? When you got some large cache of JSON information, millions of records, tens of millions of characters, you have to, because of the constraints of FileMaker, you have to get a little creative. And so storing those into, breaking it up into chunks so that you can store it in repeating fields, because you can't exceed the actual character limit of the fields. And then once you have them in there, being able to reference the information and then update the cache. But once you have it there, like a lot of the JavaScript libraries work really efficiently with large data sets like that. Like data tables is great for displaying tens of millions of records and being able to search on it really fast. And at the same time, you can, push it into a Google map really efficiently without much effort. So having those tools and knowing how to do that is sort of a big stumbling point. And it all has to do with caching. And if you cache it, great. If you can't, and that's where we come into API call issues, right? With Google, if you can't cache those results, or you can't rely on those cache and you have to pull those each time, that's where you end up with those incremental costs, 0.004 cents per call to Google to do whatever it wants, whether it's a direction or whatever API call you're doing. And then, but you multiply those by 5,000 and then, it's like a few dollars. And then you do that 20 times and, suddenly you're like, oh, wow, we're spending a lot of money on that. Is there any way to do it more efficiently? But yeah, if you can cache it, that's golden. And then being able to control that through cache in FileMaker is the next part, right? Because if you have tens of millions of objects in an array of JSON, you need to be able to, if you update a record in FileMaker, you want to be able to update that. And they don't have any clear, easy ways to manage a cache. So you kind of have to come up with your own, where you find the ID and of whatever object it is, you remove it, you add in another one, and it gets appended to the end. And that way, you sort of have to do this cache manipulation process to keep that cache as close to accurate as possible, and then those closer to the actual source as possible. If you're hosting it on a Flickr, you're running them stuff, or running them in an after hour sort of function. But it's fun. But, things to consider, definitely.
For sure. Hey, Jacob, I think we were talking about a tool that you use to extend. Talk to me.
Yeah. So I guess I could share this. This is just a VS Code feature.
Visuals.
You haven't seen. So VS Code is my go-to IDE. Let me see. Make sure I share the right screen here. Are you guys seeing Visual Studio Code? Okay, so this is just a dummy JSON structure. I literally just told ChatGPT to create me something, right? That's what you're seeing here. But the extension is actually an extension for VS Code, and it's called FileMaker VS Code. And oddly enough, this extension is pretty simple. It gives you kind of an example of what's possible with this one. Kind of the cool feature, though, is it has a run ability, which is JSON to JSON set expression. And it'll literally take any JSON structure you have. So like we're looking at this as like massive and complex, and I don't want to build this in FileMaker. I mean, we can, but we can attempt to have this run it for us, right? So in this case, I believe, let me just select all of this. I'm going to go to my command palette and just type in the function it wants me to run. And we can see that now I have a JSON set element. And it's the VS Code extension has broken it down explicitly, right? I mean, we probably wouldn't write it this way. We'd probably iterate, cool. Right?
Yeah.
But as a starting point, like functions. If you had this,
yeah.
That's cool.
That's nice.
Pretty useful. It does a bunch of other stuff too, but since we're talking about JSON, like this is very nice. And if I just need something on the fly and I know what object I'm working with, or I'm creating that object, it's perfect to just generate it even for like testing.
So. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, you got all the array in there with the counters. Okay. I have, there's something I've been doing, and I'm dying to know if you guys do this as well. Lately, I've been putting a field just called JSON in pretty much every table of systems I'm developing. And I use it to store any data that that doesn't need to be searched, essentially. So if it's anything that you need to store and write to the record, have on a list, but you don't need to search on it or sort on it, then you don't have to go creating a field for it. This is especially cool if you have like some part of your database that's only like for some period of time, you need to track 20 other variables for something, and you don't want to make a table and you don't want to make 20 fields. You can just use this one field to store whatever structure you want, and without having to make any other field. You never have to touch the graph to do stuff. Have you guys used something like that?
Similar techniques as far as, one of my favorite things to use is the list of and then building JSON, just to store JSON data. But I'm very curious to see how you're doing that.
I don't know if I can pull something up while we're talking.
Oh, that's okay. I'm just hearing about it.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is you're just storing non-indexed data into a field, and is that field indexed?
It doesn't need to be, because you're not really, you could search on it. So for example, let's say you have an address field, right? Address, city, state, zip. Traditionally, we have all had those as separate fields in the database, but you don't really ever go searching on the address. Like in the use case that you have, that's not a field that you search on. It's not a field that you sort on, not any part of it. If you had a single JSON field, then you could use globals or some other way to get the data into it. You could display it with button bars, calculations, or layout calculations or whatever on the layout. And then later on, if you say, oh, we want to add country, or we want to add, another line of the address or some other aspect to it, you wouldn't have to go to the structure. You would just say, oh, from now on, I'm going to add one other global field to the layout, and we're going to add this one other thing. And it doesn't matter that none of the other records have it. I just find that super flexible. So yeah. I'm kind of cutting down on the number of fields I make in all the tables I make these days.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Oh, that's interesting.
So basically, it's classifying FileMaker fields in two groups.
Right.
Well, the only field storing is the JSON, and they're just entering in values into like a global space. That's what's happening for the storage of the values.
And then also for for checkbox fields or for things that you don't actually have to have like a dialog box or something to enter into, you could store any number of toggles into one JSON field. And then you can just have a button bar that looks to see if that particular thing is on or off, and then display the state on or off. And if you click it, it just switches the state. I love that. I use that a lot.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome, Matt. That's awesome. Those are some really cool techniques and ideas.
I thought that one was recently kind of like light bulb one for me anyway. I was sure that lots of other people did something like it though.
Yeah, I used similar like a bucket that you just store stuff in, non-indexable. The summary list view also makes that if you are doing, instead of doing concatenations of fields, if you are writing it in there and then you need to make an adjustment, using the summary list to be able to collect that data is also super helpful for FileMaker on fields of that type.
Do you mean like the list of function summary?
Yeah.
Like a summary part in the layout?
You'd add a field in that's got a summary and its summary list, and then you select which fields it's going to list from the table.
Yes.
Yep.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't actually tried that one, but that really makes sense to think about it.
And I was thinking about that the other day, Zandon, and using the make array
The new function.
so you build out your list and then just use the new make array from list to build out, your variable essentially of the JSON, or putting it into a field. But it might make it a little bit easier, but I don't know. I'm just
Here's another one I'll throw out, and I'm curious for your feedback. I teach classes on dashboards. I'm a huge fan of it. My definition of a dashboard is basically kind of the landing screen you come to that has meaningful, actionable, and visual. If it's not all three, it's not a dashboard. Okay, opinion. And so when a user lands on that page, depending upon what they do, it would do some sort of a query, and it would go say, oh, okay, well, these are the 10 follow-ups you have to make. This is the number of orders this week. This is blah, blah, blah. You can just basically show that data. So I have like a PSOS script or something that gets all the information and sticks it into a JSON global field. Another thing that I do is I have one JSON global field that's extremely easy to get to from anywhere in the database. And then that can store all of this information like dashboard type data. And then the layout shows that. What I love about it is it's not flashy. So if someone else goes into the database, it doesn't, flash. It's extremely fast to display and flexible to develop. You can have that same field work completely different for different types of users. And then 100% of your complexity is in the script where it should be. Right, scripting and layouts are the only places complexity should exist in FileMaker, not in calculated fields, not in complex graph structures. Anyway, more opinions.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. So when you mentioned that you can access like a global field from easily anywhere, are you one of the ways I found that I've been doing that now is with the XU Data API, and then you can make a call to anywhere, in the solution, as long as you've got a layout with that field on it, you can push and pull to that field, without having that, with that the permission turned on. So is that a way that you found to push and pull data, in this format into a solution, out of a solution, wherever you want?
Yeah, for the stuff I've been playing with recently, I haven't really needed to use the data API function to do that. I kind of just get stuff as I go. So in other words, it would, like when the user logs on, it would go get their particular information using the security level that they already have. So, go look at customers, go look at whatever, and just go do a bunch of, go to layout, enter find mode, set field, perform find, grab the data. However way you grab that, loop through it or whatever, or use the list of function. I love that one. Or you can actually with a list of those records, you can actually look at the JSON fields on all of those records and make it even easier to get all of its data. So, kind of stacking these things on top of each other. But then basically having all that stuff in the global, because you can write to the global and get to the global from any layout in the database. You don't have to have a valid relationship.
Right.
When you're referencing it as a global, just not to go off in the weeds too much, are you talking about a global field, a global variable? And so you're doing it as a global field, and you talked about PSOS. How are you referencing that? If you do PSOS to set that global variable field, how are you pulling that back at client for access? Am I missing something there?
So what I do is everything I do is WAN development. Well, I'm in Europe, right? The server that's closest to me, the AWS data center that's closest to me is in Germany, which is 1,000 kilometers away or something.
Oh, wow.
So when I do work for clients all around the world, latency is a thing, right? So So I use the PSOS and wait for the result. And so I send the JSON to the script to say, here's what I want you to do. And then the script runs and then sends me back using exit script with result with a JSON blob that has all the stuff I want. So that's how I do that. And you know, it probably would be more efficient to do it with a data API call, but I don't know, I'm really a core FileMaker guy.
Yeah.
So having, if anything that I can solve by using regular FileMaker script steps, certainly easier to teach it that way. I think it's just kind of easier to maintain, unless there's a really good reason to do it a different way. Because I mean, you could do all this with the execute SQL too, right?
Right.
Yeah.
But it's slower. It's always slower.
SQL
Yeah.
especially.
Yeah.
It's always a balance between cost and
Yeah.
and efficiency.
Yeah.
And even if you had a data API call, that data API might actually still need to run a script
Yeah,
to get
true.
the data, to get whatever set you have. So a perform script on server is great. And then I love it because you can also have a little toggle, right? I'm debugging this, I put it in local mode. And then for speed, I put it in server side mode. And then I can easily test to see if it's working or why it's not working.
Yeah, what's funny is we actually did one for a client that this is more in that esoteric realm, where we needed to take a large data blob of JSON and pull it over to mobile, and to try and do it one record at a time or anything like that was not functional. But even then, we hit the character limit for storing it as variables, and then being able to find what you needed to out of that once you had a variable. So we had to get really creative, where we created a large chunk of text that just got set in one chunk, so it was as fast as possible. Latency was not, just one big chunk. And then at the end point, we would cycle through that and quickly build thousands of global variables that are indexed based on that that text chunk. So then it could do that really fast. It could build those, and then once they were there, then they were accessible at the mobile device or client level, right? Efficiently. But that was a huge hurdle, like, to try and get with latency. It was huge. It was a huge problem to try and get a large data set to the end client, packaging it and then unpackaging it. But then we hit the other limit, where you run into a problem with globals. They can only store so much text. So we had to get really creative and create hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of globals to store each individual object.
Like a global variable, because a global field should be able to store.
Yeah, global field. We put them in a global field, and then we pulled them apart into global variables. But the global variables have a character limit. So
yes, they do.
Yeah, and so but you can create thousands and thousands of global variables without, fairly quickly. So
right.
And that's way faster than trying to traverse through a large JSON object. So some key things. Again, a little down in the weeds, so hopefully it's not.
Yeah. I'm ChatGPTing in the background. So a global field in FileMaker can still store 2 gigs of text, the same as a stored field. So that's going to blow way past the limit of what you can do with a global variable. But your solution sounds great, and you could very easily just bust that out. And I think that global variables, or any kind of a variable, is still is faster than a global field to do functions on. Yes, I haven't actually tested it at high pressure levels.
So if you put it all in a field, even if it's a global, normally it wouldn't be a global. If you put it into a field, non-indexed, of course, you have your character limit of that field of what it can store, and you can use repetitions to store larger character volume.
I didn't hear that. I'm sorry.
No, that's a completely that's a completely separate. That's a completely separate one. But once you start hitting those field limits of a field, the character limits, then you have to get very creative and start to do repetitions so you can increase the character limit.
Yeah, or more records or something. Yeah.
Or more records or something. But yeah, in this instance, it was just, we needed it as variables. It needed to be really temporary, really fluid, and having it in a field just wasn't efficient. And trying to send it as just one blob was
so for sure, right? You actually have had more than 2 gigs of text.
Oh yeah,
That's a hell of a lot of text.
Yeah, it sounds like it, but when you're talking about it sounds like it, but it really depends on what the data is. Yeah. That's true. It's easy to add it up. Yeah. and
I
it
haven't
doesn't
worked with
take
that much text in a long time, so
yeah, I was pushing hundreds of millions of characters to see what our upper limits were for data tables, and data tables still like very responsive. Of course, you couldn't incomprehensible to try and have FileMaker manage anywhere near that number of records, but data tables could still, like, you could still search on it. Like, it took a moment for it to all load into the web viewer's cache, but once you had it there, you could quickly query on it, and so that's the limiter, right, of what your upper boundary is.
Yeah, like a RAM-based
Yeah.
database at that point. Yeah.
Yeah. So lots of fun.
Like
And so the same thing
panorama.
with mobile. Like, if you package it all up into one chunk, send it to the device or the client, and then unpackage it into variables at that point, you can still work with large data sets without having the cost of the latency back and forth. You do have, it is cached data, right?
Right.
You're not.
Well,
you're not
this is the
real-time.
whole value proposition with better forms too, isn't it? Right. You have your separation of functions. You have the UI handle all of that stuff and have all that stuff local and be able to parse it and slice it and dice it and sort it. No matter how much data is in the blob, if you've got, your 2 gigs of text or more or whatever. I'm glad that I don't have to work with sets that big and solve problems that big.
Yeah.
I like the size problems in front of me right now.
Well, I think we've gone through the agenda for the most part for this. Does somebody have a recap on JSON they want to toss out?
Oh, I do have one quick question just on some of that. Does anybody have any favorite tools kind of they use for debugging and testing? Or even just building JSON, filtering it out, make sure your data is correct before you're actually using it in a production environment. I'm curious. One of my favorites is JSON formatter, but that's a pretty common one. Just because I could pull the data out, look at it in JSON formatter, filter it, make sure data is in the right place before I'm actually, using in a real use scenario. But is there any others that kind of pop out?
I mean, it's so handy. It's right there. I use the data viewer quite often to kind of test my JSON and how I'm indexing things.
I've had a couple headaches with using the data viewer, especially in larger data sets. And I like to do them separately. If I'm in FileMaker, I don't want to have to rely on FileMaker to give me my expected result. I want to use another tool to give me my expected result.
Right.
To validate. But yeah, there's a lot of, especially, I use JSON so much for parameter passing. I'm only checking that in the data viewer.
Right. And I'm sure Jacob would talk about the
VS
visual
VS Code,
which is used for that.
really
and
handy.
ChatGPT also would be great.
Yes.
It doesn't store
ChatGPT.
stuff, but it's good for validating.
Oh yeah, I don't even think about using ChatGPT to validate my JSON.
Great for sample data sets too.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure.
I think that's one of the really fun parts about this is once you get them in JSON objects, we're no longer in the FileMaker realm. But you can use the web viewer to display it, and so now you can use all of those wonderful, cool features of, there's all sorts of tools for AI to build you an interface based on a JSON data structure and give you interaction with that. And you can almost do it on the fly. You could tell your LLM, make me a quick questionnaire based on this data structure where I can click this button and this button to toggle this and this. The UI is created and you can interact with that JSON. And it's getting pretty reliable now with the recent updates, whether you're using Claude or ChatGPT. But
Yep.
One step closer to no UI, where we don't have to actually build UI anymore. We just let the LLM build it for us on the fly.
Right. Yeah, Matt had mentioned dashboard building, utilizing JSON. Some of our clients or our projects, we, when we build our button bar nav system, it's oftentimes we're storing in an admin table kind of what our tab name should be and where the layout should go to, and then all the button bars are defined using JSON and parsing it out based on the index of the number in the nav button bar sequence, and then using scripts to kind of go to layout based on the JSON, what it returned. And so just kind of harking back to using JSON in the dashboards.
I think, Zandon, where you're going, though, is like to not have a dashboard with any FileMaker or anything. You basically just have that code be generated on the fly and show you the data in FileMaker or whatever on the fly.
Yeah.
So that you don't have to do any of the predicting. Chris and I have talked about that quite a bit too.
Oh, really? I gotta check out you guys' podcast. That sounds super cool.
We have a lot of fun.
Yeah,
And
I've
we
watched a
started
couple
his first
episodes,
several
love that.
episodes are like walking right through the stuff you needed to know about AI. He kind of defines it, and I'm Dan. I have your role in that podcast. I'm the dumb guy, the citizen developer, and he's the postdoctorate giving me all the education so I can ask the dumb questions to make sure the pace doesn't go. Okay, one super off-topic thing that you have to do: ask ChatGPT for a list of things that you probably believe that are not true.
Oh, okay.
Like, you guys probably think you lose most of your energy through your head or whatever. Yeah, no. I did that just as an experiment and found that there's a whole bunch of things that I've believed all my life that are not true, and it cites the reference. And anyway, super fun
That's fun.
to try.
Wow.
What else you got, Dan?
Joe, what else is on your list?
That's most everything. There were a couple, like tidbits of like you making a note about the new commands, in FileMaker, the colon and plus operators. I think that's something that, I mean, they're super helpful. I don't know how much there is to discuss with them. But we could talk about that.
Those are a little bit more obscure, but they're definitely useful for working with arrays. But then the list to array function, I'm like trying to remember the name, is crazy useful.
Yeah, make array.
Make array.
Make array, yeah, that's the one. Yeah, it's
fantastic.
I think I'm gonna have to give it a different query. So things, you swallow spiders in your sleep. That's, I never thought of that one. That's not.
I never thought of that one either. That one actually came up on my list as well because that was an urban legend that I probably never got. But
shaving makes your hair grow back thicker. I know. I never gave that any thought.
Some of them you can skip past. Those are two of them that were on my list as well. So this is interesting.
Goldfish have a 3-second memory. Now I believe that. I joke around that all the time. It's like, ooh, look, castle. Yeah. Ooh, look, castle.
Yeah.
Okay, so I did believe that.
They can actually remember for like weeks or months.
Okay.
Wow.
Lightning never strikes twice in the same place. Yes, I've heard that. Humans use only 10% of their brains. Now, I've heard that forever.
Not true. Some of them I knew because I'm a science nerd, but yeah.
All right. Well, this might be good. I might have to narrow in things I thought I knew about outer space, but are not true. I think get a little more narrow.
That'll get fun.
I've started giving ChatGPT a lot of context when I ask it things. Like, for instance, we're going to sit down and write a new section for an after action report for an oil spill. The audience of this after action report is going to be both the public, but also elected officials. And one of the messages that we intend to get across to elected officials is the need for additional funding in this area.
Yep.
Let's begin. I'm going to give you the following 10 documents, and now write me an outline. I mean, real
you can also put all of that into an API call in FileMaker, right? So like as you're using it, a lot of that can be there to get much better results.
Yeah. I find that if I give it, a lot of context, who this project is intended for, what the objectives are before I ever give it a document. And then I just start throwing documents. And I wish it could take more than 10 at a time.
Well, that's why I was talking about the custom GPT thing. So where you can actually have a whole set of them, like over in your pane on the left, you can actually create any number of them. And each one of them has its own context and its own set of documents and its own set of sample questions.
I have done that to some extent. I've got one called Regulatory Advisor, and I've given it all the, oil spill references. And I've got one called Script Master Pro for FileMaker, but I don't really use them anymore. I've found that just go into a new chat text. I just say, hey, we're starting a new project. Start a new notebook with its own memory cache, and we're going to work on this. And I just
that's the way that's actually the way they use it in Claude, is they call it projects. And Google's got one similar, right, where you can have it reference all volume volume of stuff stored in your Google Drive. But using those as features are like starting to become the basic of what everybody's using, because nobody wants to type out a large prompt and attach documents. They just want to say, here it is. Here's the reference. I always want it to be looked at from this viewpoint. And, you do this magic stuff for me. And so, projects in cloud allow for that. ChatGPTs allow for that. But those are still like evolving so quickly. I can't wait to see what we get to have in the next year as all of these top models come up with better tools to interact with, ways of manipulating all this AI.
Yeah, the UI for AI, right? How do you get access to it and stuff like that is a big thing that's changing quickly. And the models, like the token window size from 3,000 to 12,000 to 1 million, what we have now. It's just insane.
Yeah.
And have you found that so I work on a Mac, and I find that the ChatGPT app for the Mac is not very good. That it stalls, it doesn't give results, and if you then just turn around and use it in the web browser, it works great. So I don't know what the deal with the app is.
Yeah, I found a little bit of that. I actually had an issue with trying to upload a PDF, and it was broken exactly the same way, both on the app and the web browser. So.
Well, we'll see. Are we going to need, I guess we've devolved into AI, but am I going to need the iPhone 16 to really take advantage of the next round of AI stuff coming out of Apple? Because I'm very seriously considering buying it.
I just buy them for the camera.
Yeah, well, there's that.
I have no idea. So it's going to be really interesting to see how much on-prem, or not on-prem, like on-device AI processing, because that's what Apple's really all about. Right, privacy.
Yeah.
And with a much better processor, like how much more can it really do? We don't really have any of those features yet. But it's going to be interesting. I'm in the same boat as you. I haven't yet got my 16, but I want one.
yeah, I want one, because I'm running a 12 and its battery's only lasting half the day, so it's time. Well, this was a great episode. We've devolved into AI, as almost every conversation does. And I've had a great time doing it. Thanks to Zandon and Jacob, Joe and Russell, and a special thank you to Matt Navarre. Tell us again where we can find your training classes and your podcasts.
Navarre.training. It's all there.
I've pulled it up. I have it on the screen.
And if you go. And I have a couple of YouTube channels. You can just go there and search for Navarre.training or Matt Navarre, I guess. I don't know. They're all linked from my website too.
Excellent. Well, thank you, everybody. This has been a great episode. I hope the audience enjoys it. Now you know what's coming. Get back to work.
Not me.
Yeah.
Days off now.
Thank you.
Hey, guys.